Welcome back. On to the big story that we've been tracking. The pending board exams, remember, are slated to take place between July the 1st to July the 15th. These are, of course, board exams. There are also joint entrance exams, medical entrance exams, engineering exams that are all slated to take place over the course of July and August. Now, there are parents whose children are to appear for these pending board exams who've moved the Bombay High Court for the ICSE exams and the Supreme Court in a separate petition for the cancellation of CBSE exams. Now, sources within the Education Ministry have told NDTV today that there is an indication that a final decision on whether exams will be conducted in July or not will take place by tomorrow. Sources have also indicated that there will be a uniform decision that will be taken for the entire country, irrespective of whichever state or zone you may be living in, and that there is a grading process that is being worked out in the event that the exams have to be cancelled. Joining us this evening, we have Aditi Mishra. She's the Director Principal of the DPS Gurgaon School, which is a CBSE affiliated school. We have Colonel Amit Batla. He's a parent of a class 12 student, also one of the petitioners in the petition that has been filed in the Supreme Court to cancel the CBSE exams. We have Arvind Tiwari. He's a parent of a class 10 students who's filed a petition in the Bombay High Court for cancellation of ICSE exams. And we have Riya Gupta, who's a class 12 student of the Sanskriti school. And she also has one exam still left, which is her business studies paper. Riya, I want to begin by asking you, there is a big decision that's likely to be taken tomorrow on whether exams should be conducted or not. As a student who's studying in class 12, what's your opinion? What's the general sense among students? All right, Riya, we seem to be having some audio trouble with you. We can see you, but we can't hear you. We're going to just take a moment and fix that that line with Riya. But then let me alternatively come to you, Aditi Mishra. You know, you've been with us through several of these discussions that we've had on how safe it is to conduct exams during a pandemic. The government's likely to take a decision perhaps as soon as tomorrow ahead of the Supreme Court hearing on Tuesday. What's your general sense on whether exams will be conducted or not, and what's the plan B most importantly?
Well, the way things are going, it doesn't seem that it's correct to have exams now. So whether it's a parent or a teacher or a child or a principal or even the CBSE board officials, there is a lot of worry around the number of cases that are rising of COVID-19. There are areas and there are buildings that are coming under containment. So if a child is in a containment zone or if the school falls in a containment zone, what happens next? So keeping that in mind, keeping the safety of the children in mind, certainly the most obvious decision right now is to not have the exam. But what is the plan B will be unfurled only tomorrow. We cannot, there are, like I had mentioned earlier, there are not just one plan, but there are 2 or 3 plans which could come into effect if the board exam is not done. The idea behind, I think we must understand one thing, that if it was an easy decision, it should have been taken long back, maybe 10 weeks ago. But there is no easy decision. There is no one correct answer. So to find a via media which will not adversely affect even one child is taking us hours and hours of deliberation and then trying to come to a decision. And the delay is only because of that.
Well, Aditi Mishra, you know, you've laid it out at the very outset that exams shouldn't take place, that the conditions, the COVID-19 situation in the country currently is not conducive. Remember, we've seen over 15,000 cases in the last 24 hours alone. You're also very interestingly saying that this decision should have been preempted, should have perhaps been taken earlier. Let me go back to Riya Gupta. I believe, Riya, you're back with us now. You know, let me ask you as a student, as a class 10, as a class 12 student, I beg your pardon, who has an exam still pending, what's your take and what do students like yourselves feel about this?
I think a lot of students feel that the internal exams shouldn't be considered because it's very difficult to gauge the hardness of the exams in various schools, because some schools might make the exams easier to boost the confidence of children, while some other school might make it really tough so that the child is prepared for the actual board exam. So I think that's very unfair. Although I feel like using practical exam marks might be a fair option, because we've already given them in times where there was no coronavirus, and they're also checked and graded by board examiners. So that's a very fair way to mark the children.
All right. So you've, actually answered the next level of this conversation. But let me go across to Arvind Tiwari now, because I know, Mr. Tiwari, that this is an issue that you have raised with the ICSE board in your petition in the Bombay High Court on how students should be graded. So, in the event that the exams are completely called off and not postponed to a further date, the decision, of course, will be taken tomorrow. But in that event, how will students then be marked? Especially this is very crucial for class 12 students who have university exams to look forward to. Many have provisional admissions that have been sought in universities abroad as well. Basis these marks, they sort of take the next big step. What has, the ICSE board told you as far as the grading process is concerned? Mr. Tiwari.
Ma'am, see, it is like, tomorrow we have a hearing in the Bombay High Court at 10:45 a.m. and the ICSE board is supposed to come out with the methodology that they have tried to, they have said, because in the circular that they have circulated, they have very clear categorically said that pre-board marks plus internal marks and will be taken, and some methodology will be created. And for the papers which has been attempted, the actual marks for that will be given to that paper.
Right.
So there was no clarity. So I had objected on Monday also and also on the Wednesday that we should know that what the methodology is, and the Honorable High Court was gracious enough to tell them that you have to come back with the methodology, and Monday is a date that they have to present it before the court.
Right.
So we are also waiting for that methodology, what they intend to do, because that's the same, like the apprehensions Ria has just now said, is the same. Like, the pre-board examinations are conducted very stringently in ICSE boards. The intention behind that is very clear, that they want to push the child to perform better in the final exams.
Right.
The papers are set tough, the assessment is done very strictly. And one more thing which has come to notice is that many of the students also have not attempted the pre-board marks. So there is one more apprehension, the pre-board exams. So they are also worried what would be their base if the ICSE board is insisting on pre-board marks, and that's a big problem, because we have.
So now the big question. I
have in my petition asked for
now
gradings.
The big question here is, and let me just put this in perspective for our viewers, Mr. Tiwari, because what the ICSE board has done, and this is only for the ICSE and ISC class 10 and 12, what they've done is essentially empowered students with the choice of whether they want to appear for the examination or not. They can write a letter to the school, clarifying whether they want to appear for the exam in July or not. Basis that, a decision will be taken. So what Mr. Tiwari has in fact now asked is clarity on how students will be marked. So if you choose not to appear for the board exams, how will you be marked? So clarity on the methodology for marking is something that the board is likely to clarify tomorrow as far as the Bombay High Court is concerned. But Colonel Amit Batla, let me come to you. You're a parent of a class 12 student. You've petitioned the Supreme Court over the CBSE examination. If I'm not wrong, your case will be heard on Tuesday, and in fact, the hearing on Tuesday has prompted the ministry to, to take a decision before Tuesday on this particular matter. What's happened so far, and what's your expectation?
Ma'am, good evening, and thank you once again, NDTV, for covering this very important aspect for all parents and students. And of course, we have to be clear that it is absolutely impossible to now conduct the exams. The Delhi government, the Maharashtra government, Odisha, Tamil Nadu have all written to the central government that they are not in a position to conduct these exams. As far as the methodology which is concerned, like you said, ma'am, Tuesday is a hearing in the court. The academicians in the CBSE, I am sure, are very competent and would know better. They would have worked out a tentative plan. However, based on our petition in the Supreme Court and the inputs which we have got from parents, there are three options which have been suggested and something which has been strongly contested. I'll come to what has been suggested. Firstly, the internal assessment, that is the practical or the project marks. So this was this year carried out by a CBSE detailed external invigilator.
Right.
And it was a proper exam where you had a viva voce, where you had a project submission. The marks were uploaded the same day. The child photograph was also uploaded. So those marks are already available with the CBSE. That is option one. Option two is based on the marks of the exams that have already been concluded. So a child has concluded 4. What has Himachal Pradesh done? They have taken the highest of the 4 exams which have been concluded, and on basis of that, they have marked the child.
Right.
The third is you carry out an average of the above two methodologies. That is a combination of the two. And what I would also like to say, ma'am, is what has been strongly contested and which all parents and students actually are talking in unison is you cannot have the pre-board exams. Quick 4-5 points as to why not. Firstly, there is no uniformity pan-India. It is a very subjective method. It is left to the schools to decide. The schools are not actually mandated to maintain the records, and the authenticity of such marks is therefore questionable.
Right.
Third is, the degree of difficulty of the papers is much higher. The checking is much stricter, basically to exhort the children to work harder. And the average variation between the pre-board and the final marks is between 20 to 25%. And what Mr. Tiwari and Ria was also highlighting, a lot of children have not appeared. And last, ma'am, why are we starting another exercise to collate these marks from the schools pan-India? You're going to lose time. What you just highlighted, ma'am, there are thousands of children who have applied for universities abroad.
Right.
They have cleared their exams there. They have paid fees.
Okay.
The deadline
Let
is 30th of June.
I think you've raised several crucial points, Colonel Batla, and I know that you've raised these points in the petition as well. But let me bring back Aditi Mishra into the conversation. Ms. Mishra, you of course understand the grading process, how marks are given, how pre-boards are designed differently from boards to motivate students, put them through a tougher exam first so that the board exam then seems relatively easier, etc. What would you, as a policymaker, as somebody who, if you could influence the decision, what would you recommend to happen? How do you think students should be graded so as to, be fair in the assessment? I mean, let's face it, these are students who've given half their exams in a completely different environment. A few exams are pending, especially for class 12 students. In a certain sense, the next step in your future depends on these exams. A lot rests on these grades, fortunately or unfortunately. What would you recommend to be a sound and fair process to then gauge how students have performed in these exams?
I'll first, Rishika, correct you. What I said earlier was not the decision should have been taken 10-12 weeks earlier. I said if it was an easy decision, it would have been taken earlier. It would have been taken. It's a very difficult decision.
Okay.
Having said that, I think one of the things which are being discussed right now is using the practical marks, because as of now, all subjects have a practical component. Okay. And the practicals are done through the month of January and half of February. So those 6 weeks, those records are already with the boards. And every child has appeared for them. Any child who could not appear has had a second chance in the 3rd week of February already. So those marks are there. It is possible that those marks can be then collated out of 100 and then given to the schools. But like I said, there is always going to be the 2%, 5% children who will not be happy. Some may say I studied harder for my theory exam. My board didn't go well. Right. Some would say, oh, my general assessment is brilliant. I've been getting a 95 right through. I can just sail through. So it's not a one size fits all. So for the board, both the board, ICSE and CBSE, it's a tremendous decision with taking in account all the stakeholders and then deciding what is it that will benefit that one child. For us, the child is the center of whatever we are doing.
Yes.
So some decision will be taken. I think in all likelihood, it will be something which will in any way benefit the children.
Okay. But, I want to ask you, Aditi Mishra, once again, do you believe that we're at a watershed moment as far as the evolution of grading systems in the country are concerned? There has been a lot of talk in the past as well about why have one set of exams on which the future of a child, at least the immediate future, depends. Why not have a more subjective, more holistic approach to grading? Do you believe we've arrived, coronavirus has pushed us at a juncture where we're forced to think that way now?
Yes, definitely. I'm glad you brought up this question. It's a very, very valid point. And surprisingly, all of the last 18 months, there have been discussions and debates around making education more experiential, having projects, which the child can work on. These can be multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and let it not depend on just that one exam. Having said that, let us also understand the kind of variation that exists within our country.
Right.
Let us understand that there are children in very remote areas who may not have access to materials that can create a huge project, right, or work on something which could work. There is a question of accessibility. We were discussing even the possibility of having online exams, but not every child has accessibility, access to a computer.
Well, I think a lot of those things get ruled out. But the larger point on thinking in a more subjective manner rather than an objective manner, has this pandemic perhaps pushed us to do that? Let me get in Ria Gupta into the conversation. Ria, you're a class 12 student. You've appeared, like most of us, for several exams now. This perhaps being the final and the most important one, which will, determine the university that you get into or what you do after. What do you feel about the grading process that you've been throughout your education system?
I think it's a little unfair because the exams might not be as easy as my preparation, but the grading process has been fair, so I would have liked to have seen a more holistic way of grading.
Okay, so you're saying that there should be more than just marks?
Yeah, definitely more than just marks.
More than just marks.
Because,
Let's get in both the parents. Arvind Tiwari, if I can come to you. What do you make of the entire grading process? Is it time perhaps to rethink the way marks are given, to rethink this whole number game that a lot of times students' futures are tied to?
The point is, like, the marking system is certainly a most contentious issue because admissions to colleges, the merit lists, they all contribute on the basis of marks. So marks, unfortunately or unfortunately, has become the most important gradient for deciding whether exams are happening or not. Because, past 5 days, so many parents have, called up, so many students have been calling up. They have been saying regarding only the marks. They don't want to give exams. They don't want the exams to happen. But if the exams are happening, they are forced to go just because, they are looking for that 1 or 2% extra marks that they may get, which may get them a merit list, a better college. So these things, like, we need to focus on the change where, the whole holistic view goes towards education and knowledge rather than the marks. But today, marks is the most important criteria, is something which I have come to know.
Right. Karl Bhatla, do you want to come in? Because I know you've made several alternative suggestions in your petition as well. But I mean, let's say, like Aditi Mishra was saying that, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Pre-boards cannot be looked at as a benchmark because then, every school has a different level of difficulty for the pre-board examinations. Marks, therefore, are a more uniform way of gauging students across the country. It's a more fair platform, many would say. But there's an overwhelming majority of people who believe that marks shouldn't just be it. It shouldn't be where it all ends.
I agree with you, ma'am. And like you said, probably this is an opportunity to look at the entire system de novo. And, we need to encourage children not to go through a rote learning process. Presently, it is an absolute rote learning process. Children are forced to cram up their entire CBSE book and then probably reproduce that in the exams. You need to have a system which is practical oriented, which is based on projects, which encourages a child to think, to apply himself. Like, I'll give an example. What Riya was saying, she's having a business studies exam. My daughter too has a business studies exam. So the paper has to be practical oriented. Give a project to a child on marketing. Let us look at the way a child is thinking. Is he able to apply himself to a project, or is he merely confining himself to 4 or 5 points which he has to reproduce? So we'll all agree, ma'am, marks are important because that's a parameter for the next step that the children have to take. But as to how those marks are given, definitely depends on the education policy, ma'am. And therefore, this is the right time to revisit the education policy and discourage rote learning and encourage more of practical oriented studies.
Okay. So perhaps the pandemic has forced us to think in a different way. What the decision tomorrow, is going to be is of course something that we'll all wait and watch. But that all important decision is coming tomorrow. On the other side of a very short break, I'm going to ask our panelists whether this is a decision that is coming in too late. There are students who've spent the last 2.5 months in anticipation of whether they'll be appearing for these exams or not. Should we have taken stock of the situation earlier? We'll ask that question to our panelists. But that's going to be on the other side of a short break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We're joined by parents, principals and students ahead of the crucial decision that is likely to be taken by the Education Ministry tomorrow on whether board exams, the pending board exams and other crucial exams should take place or not. My question before we went into a break was whether this decision should have been taken earlier. Riya, if I can come back to you, how have the last few months been in anticipation, of the fact that you might still have to give the exam, might not have to give it? Would you have rather had a decision sooner?
Yes, for sure. I've been really stressed. Luckily, BSc is a subject that I enjoy, so it's not been as stressful for me, but I'm pretty sure that everybody, all the students, will be going through some level of stress, because it's not easy knowing that you have an exam pending. You can't enjoy yourself freely. You can't prepare for your other exams.
Right. So you're saying that a decision should have been taken sooner. Colonel Bhatla, let me bring you in, because you've petitioned the Supreme Court and a lot will depend on what happens on Tuesday in court as well. Do you believe a decision should have been taken sooner? We cancelled exams, or rather postponed exams, when there were a few hundred cases. And then, the ministry came out and announced a decision to hold exams in July. Shouldn't we have anticipated? There are experts all over the country saying that, we're still a month or 2 months away from flattening the curve. Should we have perhaps preempted this and taken a decision sooner?
I absolutely agree with you, ma'am. It is too late to take a decision. And when the exams were stalled in March, that time we had just about 500 cases. When the decision was taken in May to have the exams, the AIIMS director had gone on record. All data said that July is going to be the peak month.
Right.
There were several representations which were made by parents associations, by students associations to
right.
the CBSE.
I know,
they were not
that
answered.
you're going to agree, and I know that Mr. Tiwari is also going to agree. But let me then give the last word to Aditi Mishra on the broadcast, because you said earlier that it's not an easy decision to take. There are lots of factors that need to be considered. What's your opinion? When I ask you, could you have taken this decision 10 weeks ago? Could you have taken it 12 weeks ago? You would have saved students a lot of anxiety.
It's a very unfair question, because you have been very heavily on hindsight. We did not know how this is going to pan out. Every country has had a different trajectory for the COVID-19. So when the lockdown started, it was supposedly only for 15 days, if you remember. So naturally, we all thought it's going to be hunky-dory. After that, gradually, the numbers have only been increasing. And frankly, I don't think anybody knew for sure whether it's going to increase or decrease or plateau or flatten. There were talks about, lots of us had tickets to go up abroad in the month of June. I know a lot of students who were planning to go abroad. We had our trips, which are students-driven trips which go out. So there was no way of knowing. I don't think anyone could have taken a snap decision at that time and said, okay, we're cancelling exams.
There was no way of knowing,
that
and
was
therefore
possible.
It's not a decision that could have been anticipated or taken earlier. I'm afraid I'm completely out of time. But for all those of you who've had sleepless nights on what's going to happen or not, hopefully there will be clarity tomorrow. Sources are indicating that there will be a uniform decision that will be taken that will apply to the entire country, irrespective of whichever zone you may live in. So thank you very much for joining me on the broadcast. Good luck to you, Ria, with whatever lies ahead. And thank you everyone for joining me. That's all we have time for. We're slipping into a short break. My colleague Sarah will be up next with more. Stay tuned.